Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. With no opposition present, the Rajya Sabha passed 7 bills in less than 4 hours on Wednesday. That included the FCRA bill, J&K official languages bill, and the 3 key labour codes. In all, 25 bills were passed and 6 bills were introduced, the farm bills included. The monsoon session of Parliament has now been adjourned sine die amidst concerns of the spreading coronavirus amongst these lawmakers. Many of those bills passed, though, have seen stiff criticism and they're being termed pro-corporate for glaring omissions that earlier protected the rights of both farmers and labour. Joining me to talk about these bills, the state of the economy, and the upcoming Bihar elections is former Minister of Finance and External Affairs, Government of India, and the chairperson of the United Democratic Alliance, Mr. Yashwant Sinha. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha, for joining in. It's been a very different monsoon session that we've seen in Parliament. 25 bills introduced, or 25 passed, 6 new introduced, but most of them had the House without any opposition. In recent memory, sir, can you recall a time where this happened and bills were passed in this way?
Well, this session has been unprecedented in many ways. First, it was held during COVID times. 2, because it had to be curtailed because of COVID.
Yeah.
3, because to begin with, it was a very short monsoon session. 4, because government came out with a very large number of controversial bills, which naturally, expectedly met with opposition, especially in the Rajya Sabha. And the labor laws on the last day were passed without any discussion because the opposition had decided to boycott the Rajya Sabha. So unprecedented in many ways. I mean, there have been earlier sessions which have been unprecedented in every regime. But, I would say that this session stands out because of the complete reluctance on the part of the government to reach out to the opposition. I had served as a minister during the Vajpayee government. And I can recount to you chapter and verse how on various occasions there was a stalemate in Parliament on some issue or the other. And Vajpayee would want us to resolve that stalemate and move on. And I'll just give you one example of this. I had taken the decision to replace the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act with 2 pieces of legislation. One was Foreign Exchange Management Act and the other was the Money Laundering Bill.
Yes.
Now, both these pieces of legislation were cleared by the Lok Sabha where we had a majority. Then we went to the Rajya Sabha. Now, in the Rajya Sabha, not because we did not have a majority, but because some very senior members, including the late lamented Shri Pranab Mukherjee, Mulayam Singh Yadav, who was in the House, I remember, they raised concern. And still, because it rings in my ears, they say we have no doubt about the intention of the present government. But you can't rule out the nature of governments which might come in the future. And they are likely to misuse these provisions of the money laundering bill. And therefore, we would want it to be referred to a select committee. I went and consulted Mr. Vajpayee, and he said we should have no objection. Let's refer it to the select committee. So the bill was referred to the select committee of Rajya Sabha. It came back with a report of the Rajya Sabha select committee. We made certain amendments in the bill as recommended by the select committee. And with those amendments, the Rajya Sabha passed the money laundering bill. Then we took it back to the Lok Sabha, who approved the new amended bill, which the Lok Sabha did. So this is one occasion in, I remember very, very clearly. Another incident I'll tell you of the UPA regime. During the UPA regime, they brought a bill to amend the Companies Act. Okay, I was chairman of the Standing Committee on Finance. So we examined the new bill. It was a very comprehensive amendment bill. We sent our report. What the government was, after receiving the report of the committee, they not only included the recommendations of the committee, they included many more amendments in company's bill. So they wanted that it be passed by Lok Sabha without referring it to the committee again. I remember there was a meeting taken by Pranab Mukherjee. I was also invited to that meeting. Mr. Moily, who was the company affairs minister, was also there. And I put my points across, and I told Pranab Mukherjee that this is now almost a new bill because the government is introducing new provisions, and therefore the committee should be given a chance to re-examine this bill. So Pranab Mukherjee agreed. Moily had objection. He overruled Moily, and he said, please refer the bill or agree to refer the bill to the standing committee, and the bill came back to the standing committee. We examined and gave our report. Now, I'm mentioning these two examples to make 2 points. Number one, that standing committees of parliament or select committees for that matter have a very, very important role to play as far as legislative business of parliament is concerned. In these bills, there was no reference to any standing committee, and the government was reluctant to refer it to the select committee of Rajya Sabha. And it is very unfortunate that we had to witness the scenes that we witnessed in Rajya Sabha. But, it is the government's responsibility not to ride roughshod over the wishes of the opposition, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee would never have done.
There are actually even more direct correlations between what transpired in this session versus what happened in the Vajpayee regime, Mr. Sinha, because there were many changes that happened specifically on the farm front. The Kisan Credit Scheme was introduced by you. Sugar was, de-licensed. The dairy industry as well. You allowed BT cotton, which was also a contentious issue. I think that, that's the point, that the entire form and feeling at this point seems to be that there is no place for opposition or dissent. There is no place, as you indicated, for a parliamentary committee to even look at this. Things were passed by voice vote. Why is it working like this, sir?
No, it is. The difference is stark, to say the least, between that regime and this regime. I remember we used to work on the basis of consensus in the Vajpayee regime. It was consensus first within the NDA partners. I used to include provisions in my budget speeches about reduction in food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, and I remember there were occasions when our NDA allies used to take it amiss, and Mr. Vajpayee will call a meeting of the NDA. I'll also be called to that meeting. I'll explain my point of view, but then, if it was not acceptable to the NDA partners, Mr. Vajpayee will advise me to take that provision back. And it happened. In fact, to tell you the truth, I got the title given by the media of rollback finance minister only because we had issues within the NDA alliance. And so that was the first body where we used to create consensus. The second, of course, was with the opposition parties. And it was never Mr. Vajpayee's style of functioning to ride roughshod over the wishes of the opposition. So he'll insist that we go and discuss it with the opposition. Not only in the Ministry of Finance, even in the Ministry of External Affairs. I remember we were bringing a legislation to amend the Sapru House Act. And, I had to go out my way to discuss the matter with Dr. Monsoon, who was leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha. So why was this being done? It was being done for the very simple reason, Mitali, that the soul of democracy, the essence of democracy, is consensus. It is not majority and certainly not majoritarianism. What we are witnessing today is majoritarianism, that I have a majority and I'll do pretty much as I wish to do, and there is no stopping. That's not the way a democracy functions.
The concern also, sir, seems to be that there is no safety valve in this situation. Things have gotten diluted to a large extent in various facets of government institution and running, and I think the parliament was sort of the peak point of that. Do you worry about that this era and air of majoritarianism that you're alluding to is now tipping to a dangerous point?
I would regard Parliament as the last bastion of democracy. That is the most representative body of the people of India. That is where the sovereignty of the country lies. It is, and that's why it's called the temple of democracy. Now, that's why Parliament must function not only smoothly and well, but Parliament must also protect democracy, the conventions of democracy, the traditions of democracy, the traditions of parliamentary democracy, the precedents, the conventions, all these must be well protected by the Parliament of India. Not by the government of India, but by the Parliament of India. And that is why the opposition has such a major role to play in our Parliament. Now, if the Parliament is railroaded into submission, if the Parliament is not allowed to play the critical role that it is supposed to play, then democracy is threatened. And I have no hesitation in telling you, and it is not my view, it is the view of many retired Supreme Court judges, that the Supreme Court has been compromised. We know the Election Commission has been compromised. We know that RBI has been compromised. We know that media, your fraternity, Mitali, has been compromised. And where else shall we look for recourse, for remedy? The only institution left for that is Parliament of India. And if the Parliament of India is also not allowed to function in the manner in which it should, then it will indeed be a very sad day for the democracy of India.
There was another concern that was raised, particularly on these two bills, Mr. Sinha, one on agriculture and farm and the other on labor, which was the timeliness of it. While some of the details may perhaps be a step in the right direction, dismantling mechanisms which have traditionally held back the smooth flow of economy, the sense one gets is you're hitting them when they are down. Was this the right time to introduce these kind of reforms which are taking away the rights of labor when regarded with the Labour Act, and which are not allowing farmers that basic floor of an MSP when they are entering into contracts with private parties? The timing seems really, really unfortunate.
Well, Vitali went to the merits of the farm legislations and the labor legislations. I'm postponing them for another occasion. The point I'd like to make is, whatever be their importance, whatever be their long-term impact on agricultural development or on economic development generally, my point is, you look at now the almost 3 decades of reform history, economic reform history in India, starting 1991. It's almost 3 decades. Now, how have the reforms taken place? By fits and starts. I remember my 2001 budget speech, in which I had talked about many reforms, including in agriculture, including in the labor market. And what happened? I was not able to push those reforms because the Parliament of India was not ready. Even elements within our own government were not ready. Our allies were not ready. And perhaps the people of India were not ready. So some of those reforms had to be just put in the cold storage, and they are being revived now. So, the point is, if you railroad a reform, it's not acceptable to the people of this country, then you will not succeed. your reforms will not succeed. Your reforms will succeed only when people are prepared to accept them. And, there are core issues for reform in our economy. There is no doubt about it. But then why don't we discuss it? Why are we shy of referring them to the Parliamentary Standing Committee? Suppose the farm legislations had been referred to the relevant Committee of Parliament, Standing Committee. What would have happened there? They would have not only discussed it among themselves, they would have called for discussion all the stakeholders. In this case, the Kisans of India would have been called for a discussion, and they would have had this satisfaction that they have been heard, they have been consulted by a parliamentary committee. Now, the government does not reach out to them, Parliament is not allowed to reach out to them. We just thrust reform them, they rise in revolt, they are not going to accept it. So how are you going to implement those reforms? And then there is a very important issue in the farm legislation about the federal principle enshrined in our constitution. Is it constitutionally valid? That's a moot question. There are many people who believe the center has no point, no authority to legislate on these issues. And let me tell you, in Bihar abolished the APMC Act in 2006. Now, have the farmers prospered in Bihar? They today earn one of the lowest incomes in the whole country, despite the fact that 14 years have elapsed since the abolition of the APMCs. Now, this is something which is based on a conjecture which may or may not be valid, that the farmers are going to get a better price for their produce. And if there were defects in the functioning of the markets, the agriculture produce markets, then please take steps to remove them. If there are problems with the functioning of Parliament of India, will you abolish the Parliament of India? Saying it's not functioning well, so let's abolish it. That's no way to tackle an issue.
Yes, indeed. And they've probably seen the most volatility in terms of crop prices as well in Bihar. There's two spaces which you have dealt with very deeply, Mr. Sinha, as Minister of Finance and External Affairs Minister. And the other thing that came out quite oddly in this particular parliamentary session was the no data response. There was no data on migrant labor deaths. There was no data on details of incursion by China. Is it possible, sir, for a government to function this way without access to or even the need to collate this kind of data for what has truly been a completely unforeseen disaster, but something that we must have enough material on to work with?
Mithali, I am saying this with a great deal of sadness in my mind, that this perhaps is the first government which not only does not collect very critical data, it also dresses up us. There have been many instances in the past where data which has been collected, for instance, by the NSSO has been held back on unemployment, on other issues. The data has been held back. And sometimes we have evidence that the data has been dressed up. Now we have evidence that now that the government does not collect or does not want to collect some very important data like death on the road of the migrant labor who are trying to go back to their villages. Why shouldn't that data have been collected? I read somewhere in those days that something like 870 migrant laborers had lost their lives on the road in various accidents, exhaustion, this, that. But the government does not have. The media has the data, government does not have the data. Similarly, farmer suicides. Now, this is a data which was collected earlier. Now the government says we don't have data. So this is all very funny, which means what? That any data that will not reflect well on your function will not be collected. And when you are asked a question about that, you will brazenly say, we don't have data. That is not the way a government should function.
You touched upon a very important point regarding federalism, Mr. Sinha, and that seems to be really where the situation has become extremely acute. States are now in a complete face-off with the center. It's not just to do with the farm bill; it's also to do with what happened with the GST compensation, where many states are now being told either you go and borrow yourself or you just have to wait till June 2022. Do you fear, sir, that this entire concept of federalism has been hit quite hard? And what do you see as the longer term effects of this?
Um, there is a complaint against this government that it believes in jumlas. So many of the things that it might have said should be taken as jumlas and not taken seriously. I like to remind you that when Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister of India in 2014, you remember he talked about Team India? He talked about Team India consisting of all the chief ministers of states and important members of the central cabinet. And he said, it's this Team India which is going to take the. He himself has been a chief minister. He might have had his complaints with the government of India and the way they were dealing with him. But learning from that experience, he should have been proactively more federal in his approach rather than being a unionist. And therefore, it is very unfortunate that a prime minister who has been a chief minister for long years himself is the one who, as prime minister, is eroding the concept of federalism in our nation. And this will not work in a country of the size of India, the diversity of India. It's only decentralization which will work, not centralization of powers. And if the government of India hopes, the present government of India, that they will be able to, take the states for a ride, they're mistaken. The states will accept some, they'll put up with some, they will tolerate some, but a stage will come where they will be forced to rebel. And GST compensation is one issue where I would like to tell you, as somebody who not only initiated the whole process of the GST, but I examined the legislation as chairman of the Standing Committee on Finance, that if there is no goodwill between the states and the center, then GST is a dead letter. GST will not function. And it's BJP which has been critical, which was critical of the UPA government for not compensating the states for VAT losses at one point of time. And now, they are residing from a sacred, a solemn assurance, a constitutional assurance that was given to the states that they will be compensated for loss of revenue. And they're going back on that. So, where does all this end? Federalism in India today is under the gravest threat.
Do you believe, sir, that there will come a point where states will rebel? Because the sense one gets right now is that more and more the odds are being stacked against states, even by way of law. I mean, today there's a ruling by the Bengal High Court saying if there's any central government employee, the central government can basically overrule the state's stand on it and intervene. This obviously helps some of the CBI cases in West Bengal, but it looks like more and more the law itself is the goalposts are being shifted to become more pro-center and more sort of dilutive for the states. Do they have the elbow room to fight back, sir?
We are in a dangerous phase, let me tell you that, because BJP rules over the majority of states, overwhelming majority of states in the country. There are only a few states which are being ruled by opposition parties. Some of those state governments are managed by the government of India to support its various actions. So therefore, those who are standing up today for federalism or for the right of states are in a very small minority. And that is the danger, because take the issue of compensation of the for GST. I think the majority of states have accepted the Government of India formula because they are BJP ruled states or BJP friendly states. So they have accepted. But is this a good thing to happen? Perhaps not. And there might come a time where you will have more opposition ruled states, opposition party ruled states, which will then not accept it. I mean, even as far as the farm legislations are concerned, I'm sure the matter will go to the courts of law. I'm sure there will be a state which will say, sorry, we are not going to implement the legislation that you have formulated. And that will be a real confrontation between the center and the state governments. I mean, we are aware of the fact that income tax rates have been conducted in the states with the help of CRPF. Or there is example of a recent example of an actress in Mumbai being given a certain classification of security and provided with central paramilitary forces for her security. Now, suppose the Mumbai police wanted to act against her, then wouldn't it lead to a confrontation between a central paramilitary force and the state police? So why are we taking that risk? These are all instances of dangerous erosion of the federal principle and the right of the states.
Which brings us to the very imminent elections in Bihar, Mr. Sinha, where this time you have entered the fray as well. What do you believe, sir, will be the plank on which people in Bihar will go out and vote? What do you think they're making their decisions around?
Well, the BJP NDA alliance will come out with lots of jumlas that they are doing already. They are making claims which are based on falsehood. Unfortunately, the main opposition has a track record of 15 years of rule in Bihar. And the biggest insurance for the current government, current alliance, NDA alliance, is to remind the people of Bihar what happened in those 15 years when the opposition today was in power. And that is why a person like me and many more believe that the people of Bihar are looking for a third alternative between these two coalitions. And when I came to the conclusion that this is indeed what the people of Bihar wanted, I decided to plunge into Bihar politics and create this third front and take part in the political process in that state.
One plank for Nitish Kumar, even in 2009, Mr. Sinha, was good governance. And as the Bihar government, state government themselves claims, growth is very high. What are your own thoughts on the Bihar model of growth, where last year they say that they have delivered 10% growth, higher than what the nation has delivered, and of course they have many parameters within that, rail and air services, etc., have worked very well for them. Do you believe in the Bihar model of governance or the Bihar model of growth?
I don't think there is any model of growth in Bihar. That's the first point which I like to make. The second point is that the condition before Nitish Kumar became the Chief Minister of Bihar was so abysmal in Bihar that even a slight improvement was noticed by people, and he became the Sushashan Babu all over the country, known as Sushashan Babu, a man who delivered good governance in Bihar. But over the last years, people have seen through this. And, Bihar today is in the grip of all kinds of problems. If there was 10% growth, economic growth in Bihar, where is the evidence of that? Why is it that 40 lakh youth from Bihar go out every year to seek livelihood in other parts of the country? Why is it that we witness those very sad scenes, tragic scenes of people from Bihar who are working outside, trying to come back to Bihar on foot? Why did that happen? And they were not given proper employment opportunities in Bihar, so most of them have gone back. I told you a little while ago that the farmer in Bihar earns the least that any farmer earns in this country. Education has collapsed. Uh, Healthcare has collapsed. For if a Bihari student wants to better his prospects, he has to go out and study somewhere else. If he wants better medical facilities, then he has to go out. I mean, one of my full-time jobs as a minister, as a member of parliament, when I was part of Bihar, used to be to, ensure that people got proper treatment in All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi. So why are people of Bihar going out to places like Vellore, to Mumbai, to Delhi, to Kolkata for better treatment? So everything today in Bihar is in a state of collapse, whatever the claims of the government. And floods have added to the woes. There are people even today living under torn bed sheets, on the banks, on the highways, because their villages have been flooded. And Corona, the COVID-19 pandemic is prevailing. There is no law and order today in Bihar. There has been no investment in Bihar in the last 10-15 years, despite all claims and investor meets. It just hasn't happened. In fact, Bihar has gone through a phase of deindustrialization, and a number of factories in Bihar have closed down. Cotton mills, sugar mills, jute mills, all kinds of factories which were there, they've just closed down. Bihar has almost 10% of the country's population. And today we have only 1.2% of the country's industries in Bihar.
It's interesting you say that, Mr. Sinha, because there is a state of collapse, but there also seems to be a state of comatose amongst the people. I mean, one has not heard or seen any public outcry or protest against the situation, whether it was regarding migrant labor or otherwise. During the assembly elections, Bihar actually had the highest percentage of nota, where people went out and voted on the none of the above options. Even at this point, it seems like there is no clear leader aside from that triumvirate that we've had of Nitish Kumar, Lalu Prasad Yadav and Paswan over the last 30 years. What's the state of psyche for people in Bihar? Have they sort of accepted this as their lot and hence are not protesting?
I'll take you back, Mitali. I don't know where you were born, to 1977. Okay. I've seen the streets of Patna, masses of people going to a meeting in Gandhi Maidan, which JP was supposed to address, Jayaprakash Narayan. Okay? On the same streets, I saw a scene when 5-6 people were talking by the roadside, and they heard a police siren. A vehicle was coming, blowing its siren, and they immediately melted away. And I said, oh my God, look at the number of people, that massive meeting in Patna Gandhi Maidan, and they pledged their loyalty to Jayaprakash Narayan. Where is that loyalty today? We saw that loyalty, the anger, the disappointment, the frustration of the people when they went to vote in 1977. And Congress lost all the seats in the Lok Sabha. This is how, this country is not given to bloody revolutions. It's given to bloody crimes, but it is not given to bloody revolutions. People of Bihar, I'm sure, will show their disappointment, their anger, and maybe even the earlier regime, when they go to cast their ballot at the booth.
There is another, sort of oddity about Bihar, Mr. Sinha, which is that people have pointed to how the percentage of women voters in Bihar was higher as it was in the assembly elections. But a part of that reason is actually because many villages in Bihar lie empty. Most of the men have migrated to other states in order to look for work, whether it is temporary or permanent. This time round, perhaps a percentage of that migrant labor still remains in Bihar. Do you think that will alter the way people vote? Do you think that that will be indeed a large issue for Bihari voters, the entire migrant labor episode and how they were treated or mistreated?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very important issue. They are not going to easily forget it. They went through all kinds of troubles. They even lost their lives coming back to the villages. They will not forget the fact that they were trying to enter Bihar, the borders of Bihar. They met with a very strong reluctance on the part of the Bihar government to admit them into their own state. And it was only with great difficulty that edict of no entry was taken away, and the people could then come back to their villages. So do you think they are going to forget all this in a hurry? And let me also tell you one more figure, that the population of Bihar has more young people today than the national average. If the national average is around 50 for people below 25 years of age, the Bihar figure is 57. So more and more employment opportunities are needed. And if your agriculture is in a bad way, your industries have collapsed, there is no fresh investment, there are no fresh employment opportunities, then what is going to happen to these young people? More and more of crime. And that is why, Bihar has become a crime state. There are murders, loot, rapes taking place in hundreds every day in different parts of the state.
There are some rumblings at this point that perhaps the two ruling parties have some differences of opinion over who should be the chief minister, whether it should be Nitish Kumar or Nityanand Rai from the BJP side, Mr. Sinha. As part of the opposition, do you think that conversation is on the table to explore something like a Maharashtra formula, if it gets to that, where like-minded parties can ally with either one of these large parties to form an alternate government, such as happened with the Shiv Sena in Maharashtra?
Well, the Maharashtra development, as you know, was a post-electoral development. I will not venture an opinion with regard to post-electoral developments in Bihar. I will not even venture an opinion about pre-electoral developments in Bihar, because things are changing very fast. There are all kinds of issues within the coalition, a ruling coalition, that is the NDA. There are issues within the opposition coalition. So one does not know today which way things are going to settle down before the elections. And, in politics, as you know, 1 week is a long time.
One final question to you, Mr. Sinha, because you've been Minister of Finance and you've worked so deeply with areas of agriculture and farmers. There is a conventional wisdom or a local wisdom which says that when you anger the farmers, it is indeed a very dangerous time for any ruling government. Because of what's happened with the Farm Bill, and I'm not getting into the pros and cons of it, because of the way farmers have reacted, do you think this could have been a misstep by the government and a decision that they may have to pay for?
This is going to have an impact. This is going to have a bearing on even Bihar elections. Other elections are still some time away. But even on the Bihar elections, this is going to have an impact. Though I told you that Bihar abolished the APMC Act in 2006, but the farmers' lot has not improved. So the farmers of Bihar are watching. And they know that what the government has done is not acceptable to the farmers all over the country. And therefore, they'll have a great deal of sympathy for the other farmers. They will realize where their own interest lies. And I'm sure all this will be kept in mind when the farmers particularly go to vote on election day. All these things will count. It is not going to go away in a hurry. And neither is the movement of the farmers in other parts of the country. The Bihar farmer has not yet risen in opposition because, as I told you, the people of Bihar are peace-loving generally, and they don't rise in revolt easily. But regime change is something that people of Bihar understand very, very clearly, and they remember it, remember all these things when they go to the polling booth and cast their vote. So we have to depend on the good judgment of the voters.
Yes, sir, I can hear you. Please.
Let me also tell you that Bihar and Biharis are accused of voting on caste basis. But there have been any number of occasions in the past where they have risen above caste and voted without caste considerations. And if I could tell you, even the last Lok Sabha election, the NDA alliance would not have won 39 out of 40 seats in Bihar if the Bihar electorate was voting only on caste considerations. So I am hoping that in this election also, the people of Bihar will rise above caste, will vote for Bihar, and will vote for change.
I wish you all the luck in your campaign, Mr. Sinha. Thank you very much for speaking with us. It's also lovely always to go back in history and hear more about what the Parliament looked and sounded like. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Mithali.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.